So the name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where I highlight individuals who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly, and Danielle Parchment, you are definitely one of those persons.
I would say my passion started off early in the arts. Spence is a private all-girls school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. With Spence, they really set me up for greatness because they have this idea where even though you might be passionate about something, they want you to explore other fields. And I think the sisterhood aspect of an all-girls school really is what made my time at Spence so loved and so welcoming. Cambria to Buckley was difficult, and I think that was mostly in terms of one, environment. It was very different. At first was like, am I really supposed to be here? Failure doesn't define your whole life story. And that I was able to leave Buckley being awarded Writer of the Year. COVID hit us in our 6th grade year. Definitely writing became a place of refuge for me during that time when I had suffered the loss of my uncle. I definitely found poetry as a way of pouring into my grief and seeing how can I get these emotions I'm feeling out on the page. For me, how I chose my Ivy. At Penn, I truly felt that all the students wanted to kind of uplift each other and that there's this aspect of work hard, play hard. There can be times when you can feel tired, you can feel burnt out. So I would tell her, little Danielle, to never feel discouraged by the adversities that come in your way because you will always come out victorious because you are destined for greatness.
Danielle, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Of course. I'm so happy to be here.
So the name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where I highlight individuals who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly, and Danielle Parchment, you are definitely one of those persons. So I want to, before we get into all the accolades that you've accomplished so far, congratulations on your Ivy League acceptance to UPenn.
Thank you.
Going to Spence, being a leader at Spence, writing a book, all these different accomplishments that, everyone I'm sure asks you, how you do it? How do you get to it? How do you manage so many things? Let's start from the beginning as Danielle at, let's say, Cambria Heights School for the Gifted. What was your passions? What were you interested in before we get into Spence and Ivy League acceptance?
Of course. So, hi everyone. As Raman said, my brother, who you can assume by the similarity in last name. My name is Danielle Parchment. As he mentioned, I'm a senior, recently graduated at the Spence School, May 21st. I'm 17 years old, and as he mentioned, I will be pursuing a bachelor's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in the fall. So to answer your question, Raman, about, at Cambria, at CCGC, what I really had that passion for, I would say my passion started off early in the arts. Definitely at my lower school years at Cambria Center for the Gifted Child, there was definitely, a plethora of arts activities that we were able to involve in. Every year we would have what was called an assembly where we would study, a racial or ethnic group. Over the years, I did presentations on Malaysia, on Costa Rica, on South Africa, on Senegal. And we would, find cultural wear for these ethnic and racial groups. And we would celebrate and highlight their culture throughout our school experiences. So I think starting at CCGC, it really gave me, a vision for highlighting and being, very versed in different racial and ethnic cultures and communities. And even throughout my time at Buckley and at Spence for high school, I've definitely seen how I've been able to work with various affinity groups at Spence and at those schools and be able to highlight those differences in cultures and celebrate all our cultures. Also at Cambria with these assemblies, there was not only the cultural highlighting aspect, there was also the idea of performing, of oral presentation, public speaking, and dance. And I think through those experiences as a young girl, we started these in nursery, and It really allowed me to be able to work on my public speaking, something that most of my teachers and mentors talk about is my love for public speaking and being able to, talk in front of a crowd. And I think that CCGC really set up that foundation because of those presentations from early on, where we were presenting, speaking in front of the school, speaking in front of our parents on these different cultures that we were researching and highlighting. So I think that's definitely something that I was passionate about, being able to hold an audience, being able to share my voice with an audience, and just being able to highlight different cultures through my voice and connect those cultures to my shared heritage at home, coming from a Jamaican family. And
Mm-hmm.
lastly, tying into the whole arts experience, would be song, dance, and creativity. And I say this because at Buckley, I started playing the violin, and throughout my time at Spence, I've been on the Spence Orchestra playing the violin. We performed at Carnegie Hall, one of the places that we have, been selected to perform at. And I think Cambria really grew my love for, song and performance when it
Mm.
comes to the musical arts, because I started off there with the piano, and that grew into my love for the violin. And then with dance at Cambria, these presentations also came with dance. We used to perform in front of everybody. We would do cultural dances for, the country we were highlighting and celebrating. One of my most, famous and prized moments was when we were researching Senegal, and we would do like African dancing and highlighting that diaspora of Afro beats. And even at Spence, I'm on the booster team, which is an audition team for students who are interested in hip hop and, dance creativity. And at the end of the year, that culminates in a dance concert where we highlight all our work that we've done. So I've definitely seen how my humble beginnings at CCGC has grown my love for dance, song, creativity, and public speaking, and my overall love for the arts, which I'm looking to pursue in the fall this year.
Yeah, so that is very interesting because, like you said, you have a strong background in the arts. You have a strong
Mm-hmm.
ability to speak in public, and but but you didn't just pursue art at UPenn, right? You plan on
Mm-hmm.
doing law and a minor in
Yes.
business. So there's like seeing what the arts have done for you, your passion
Mm-hmm.
for it, and then you've also like found a way to navigate still being an
Yes.
artist and then finding this route. So like
Mm-hmm.
how did you go about as a young person? Because I know in my time at ninth grade in Jamaica, it was
Mm-hmm.
like a pivotal moment where you're like, okay, what am I going to actually do? Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, I love visual arts, I love drawing, but I
Mm-hmm.
knew, frankly, I couldn't go to current parchment or my mom with like, hey, I want to become a straight up
Yes.
artist, right?
Yes.
And I was like, there's a balancing act between what I can do for myself and
Mm-hmm.
what my family wants, right? And I was like, I wanted to do architecture. I could still be an artist, but I can still also be a professional in the sense of traditional professional
Mm-hmm.
aspect. Like, how did you go about like, I know I'm good at this, but now I want to pursue law with a minor in business.
Yeah, I think for me, Spence really set me up for being able to hone in on my passions and also explore other fields. Spence is, for those not familiar with Spence, is a private all-girls school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, K through 12. And Spence is one of the schools located in the New York City Private School Inter-School League. With Spence, they really set me up for greatness because they have this idea where even though you might be passionate about something, they want you to explore other fields. So at Spence, there are certain criteria that every student has to do. So for example, every student has to take physics, chemistry, biology, and then in their senior year up to choice, you can choose to take one of the science electives, whether it be, continuing your love for biology and chemistry in a more advanced course, or exploring a different side that we haven't explored, like forensics, which I took, which is highlighting both the psychology of criminal behavior and also building on the knowledge we did in biology in 11th grade. And I think in addition, Spence also forces our students to, be able to explore different realms of math through our math system that we use called Exeter Math, that which was created by Phillips Exeter Academy, the boarding school in New Hampshire. It forces students to be able to use problem solving and leaning on each other instead of being focused solely on the teacher explaining and telling them everything. Spence really focuses on the idea of problem solving. And throughout these different courses that I've taken throughout my time, they've really explain things to me. Even though I have a love for the arts, I've seen how my science classes and my math classes have contributed to my love for humanity, for the humanities. And I think it's also important to notice that people really only think that problem solving, critical thinking, those skills really come
Right.
into when you're looking at STEM fields. But
Mm-hmm.
I tend to offer a different opinion with that
Opinion.
because
Yep.
I'm taking constitutional law. That was my spring semester elective for Spence for my senior year, which also
Yeah.
connects to what I'm pursuing at Penn in the fall. And constitutional law, it requires a lot of problem solving, critical thinking, and the ability of being able to lean on your peers for their thoughts, because there have been times when we've sat in class at Spence. We sit in a circle to
Yeah.
foster dialogue and communication. And there have been times when we've sat in that circle and we're going over case ideas with one another. And we're like, well, I see the opposition side here, but how can we argue this point to the class? And even my teacher, Miss Ash, who I had, before we would start class, she always had this picture of her brain doing like pull-ups.
Okay.
Yes, that image. And when I think about constitutional law and my other humanities classes, it forces us to think and to be critical in a way that I also see in my math classes. And
Okay.
when I was talking to my constitutional law teacher when she formulated this course when it entered Spence, I was telling her how some of the same problem solving skills I've learned in math I also use in her class. And she was telling me that when she was formulating this class, she actually sat in on a math class to learn how students can use the thoughts that they build off one another in order to get to the final answer. So we see through that experience that, humanities and both STEM fields, I feel like they intersect in a way. People tend to separate them, but definitely at Spence, through the interdisciplinary courses and what we foster here at Spence, it forces us to be able to use similar assets of our skill set to be able to find mastery. And I think that it connects to the Spence motto, which is not for school, but for life we learn, where we're not just learning what we learn at Spence to just get our diploma and just
Yeah.
walk out and be like, we're done. It's learning skills that will benefit us beyond the red doors. Spence forces students to be able to take a modern language or classical language through their 3 years. And if they choose not to in their 4th year, that's fine. But most students end up doing that. Myself, I came into Spence with both knowledge in Latin and Spanish, and I decided to pursue those fields when I came into Spence. Spence also offers independent science research, independent history research, eco fellows, courses like that. Which allows students to build off all their skills and culminate it into a final research project. So I definitely feel like I had that aha moment
Yeah.
that I really wanted to pursue law. I think that was further solidified in my senior year, doing these courses, doing the most advanced courses at Spence and saying, this is what I want to do. But also with my extracurriculars over the years, being on equity council, having to collaborate and work with people and come in, how can we maintain our school to be an equitable place? On student council, when I came into Spence in 9th grade, I won student council president in my first 3 weeks being at Spence. So seeing how my voice can inspire people and be able to, want people to be able to have me on their side. And also just like my extracurriculars, like debate, some
Yeah.
other ones that involve public speaking in my affinity groups that I run at Spence as head of the Afro-Latina affinity group at Spence, which I co-head with one of my dear friends, Elle, and my junior heads. How can we be able to create a space for Black Latina and Caribbean students at a predominantly white institution. So I think that throughout all my spheres at Spence, throughout all my courses, all my extracurriculars, it has really culminated my love for what
Yeah.
I'm intending to pursue. And I hope to see how UPenn can even grow those passions even more.
Yeah, no, it's definitely I always pride. I always tell people to get a very rounded base or just be a
Yes.
Renaissance person. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like do the arts, do sports, do everything you
Yes.
can
Yeah.
do, and just like before you like pigeonhole yourself into one thing, and then you can learn from other ideas and other areas. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the stuff that I learned in art, I still use it till this day, right?
Yes.
It just gives you just this broader stroke ability to see the full picture. A lot of times people can get like stuck in one main
Yes.
thought or main
Mm-hmm.
idea, but when you have like things to grasp from, you can like see
Mm-hmm.
different ideas. So I love it. I love that you said it that way. I wanted to go back to after Cambridge School
Mm-hmm.
of Gifted, and then you
Yes.
went to Buckley's, and I'm sure that. And this, you're going to deal with this throughout your career and your life, like
Yeah.
transitioning zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yes.
and dealing with what I would say am I good enough, anxiety, dealing
Yeah.
with um now I'm faced with this new idea, this new concept, a new way of teaching, never learned this way of
Yeah.
teaching before.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you deal with those moments, because I'm sure there was a transition point between Buckley's and Cambridge Heights that was challenging, maybe technology wise, maybe using
Yes.
certain tools. Like how did you deal with that?
Yes. Definitely I would say that going from CCGC to Buckley was definitely an adjustment. When I came into Buckley in fifth grade, unfortunately, there were no, adjustment policies or adjustment programs created as in later years when some of my other friends came in from Cambria in like sixth grade or seventh grade. There were, resources. There were a lot more resources that were available. And there was like a whole like 2 week, 3 week, 4 week summer thing where they were able to integrate into the community and be able to learn certain aspects that I didn't have the ability to, because when I came in there weren't really resources for new students like myself coming from a completely different environment.
Right.
um Cambria to Buckley was difficult, and I think that was mostly in terms of one environment. It was very different. At Cambria I was there from when I was a baby, like nursery. And I had grown lifelong friends there at Cambria because it was home for me. All my teachers, my family. Cambria was majorly made up of young women and men who looked like me. So, going to Buckley where you're going to a PWI on Long Island, it was definitely a culture shift there, because
Right.
what you consider the norm is not necessarily the norm at Buckley. Like at
Yeah, right.
Cambria, we would bring in Caribbean food to have for lunch, and Caribbean food at Buckley was something that was seen as, unique, diverse,
Right,
and
right, right.
something that has never been seen before. So definitely that was an adjustment there. And also with the technology aspect, certain aspects of my education at Cambria, I hadn't really built up enough for Buckley. So definitely there was an adjustment there in terms of, how to create an infographic for the first time on Canva, utilizing Google Slides, utilizing Google Docs, things like
Mhm.
that. And I think definitely, my teachers really helped me, adjust to that. My parents also, and also you, Ramon, because I remember when I first used Canva for the first time, you were actually the one who gave me the rundown on how to create an infographic and what template. And now I'm a Canva pro. I can use
Yeah, yeah,
Canva.
yeah,
I can
in your
use
sleep.
Canva in
Yeah.
my sleep. So definitely, I think that that adjustment was hard, both culturally and um, educationally, because it was so different. And
Mhm.
also, Buckley is very academically rigorous. So
Yeah.
that was something that I definitely had to get adjusted to. I was really learning my foreign language for the first time, Spanish. I picked
Mm-hmm.
up Spanish in fifth grade.
Right.
So there was definitely that aspect of, getting adjusted, but after time, it definitely became second nature. And by the time I got to sixth grade, I felt very comfortable at Buckley.
Yeah, and I feel like you when you're going through those motions, there's a lot of feelings you feel at those moments because like
Yeah.
especially like you're coming from a different place, you're doing well at
Yeah.
that place, you're transitioning into a new place, new
Yeah.
people, new environment, you still want to
Mhm.
set the tone as a good student, and
Yeah.
then you get faced with these obstructions and like how
Yes.
you work through those feelings. Like
Yes.
do you have a process in the way you work through it? Some people just bite down, they just do the work, or do you like
Mm. I think
is there a
this
book?
really I think this really connects to what at MF Buckley we have this tradition where we write our eighth grade speech and we present it
Mm-hmm.
to the school at the end of the year. And the
Okay.
title of my eighth grade speech was From the Pit of Adversaries to the Everest of Strength.
Mm.
And I think that highlights how when I came in at Buckley in fifth grade, I faced a lot of adversities in trying to, how to type fast, how to keep up with the class, how to adjust to the major shift in technology, which I had not experienced at my previous school, and just being thrown into it. And I
Right.
think at Buckley, the feelings I originally felt at first was like, am I really supposed to be here?
Yeah.
I think for a lot of young black girls and young girls of color, when entering certain communities, it can be very hard to adjust, especially when there's this notion that you're not supposed to be here or that you're just a quote unquote diversity
Right.
hire or diversity student. Um and I definitely felt that aspect of I'm not supposed to be here because originally when I was entering Buckley, I didn't have the skill set for certain topics that other students might have learned in their previous years coming from Buckley. So, what really helped me work through that was my mom and dad because they were like, you know what, Danielle, even though you are having a hard time here, you know, in your first months acclimating to this massive change, you're a smart girl. You wouldn't have got into this place if you did not have the skills for it. And you just have to take time adjusting and making sense. Like my dad, he would sit down and work with me with certain topics I've never done before in math. My mom would help me, go over my English essays, make sure everything was perfect. And I think that it really speaks to my testament at Buckley because coming in from that, when I graduated Buckley, I was announced Writer of the Year. That was an
Right. Right.
award that I received. So I'm in my eighth grade speech, I talked about how even though it might look bleak at first, how it might
Yeah.
seem that, you don't know where to start, you're lost, you're trying to figure out things, you're navigating this building which is twice the size of your old school. Um,
Right.
it can look hard and it can look challenging, especially when there's this notion of, you're already a student of color. There's already eyes on you that are telling you that you're not supposed to be there and
Mm-hmm.
you're failing originally, that failure doesn't define your whole life story. And that I
Yeah.
was able to leave Buckley being awarded Writer of the Year and also, leaving with a high academic trajectory in order to be able to attend Spence for my
Right.
high school years. So for other, young students who are watching this and other young students who feel excluded, whether based off racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, or religious reasons, I give that advice that, it's okay to fail at first because what I learned from my teachers is that fail actually starts for first attempt in learning, but you can grow from that and that failure doesn't define your life story or your success.
Well said. Yeah, it's definite, and I'm gonna tell you, as someone who's failed and failed often, and then have to figure it out and keep figuring
Yeah.
it out. That story that you have in yourself, every moment you move to a different transition, you're
Mhm.
gonna have that moment, right?
Yes.
And once you have like a framework in yourself to
Mhm.
like remind yourself I've been here before. Like
Yes.
I've started in a moment where I didn't know what I was doing and I can figure
Mhm.
it out when new challenges come to you, and it's going to come to you in different ways, right?
Mhm.
even I'm thinking even past college, when you first go to your first job interview, when you first go to your first job application and they give you a new
Mm-hmm.
task you've never done, all these moments, it comes, I always go back to the moment where it was a aha moment for me. For me, it was
Yeah.
tennis, right? Where it like clicked for me, like, okay, I'm not good at this initially, but I
Mm-hmm.
kept trying, I kept showing up, I kept playing, and then eventually became national champion, and then eventually became, funny enough, the student of the year. I was like,
Yeah.
all I did was just kept showing up and
Just
kept
showing up.
trying.
Yeah.
And so, like, you never know where your trajectory is when they carry you because of where you started. You just have to keep showing up. And time again, we see this type of tenacity. That's why everyone's so amazed by Brunson. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
see Jalen now carrying the Knicks to the finals, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, he was always counted out for his size and his height. And like,
Yeah.
are you good enough? But he kept showing up for himself. And
Yeah.
once you can show up for yourself and you can keep trying, people gravitate to that energy and they're willing to help you through the process. But
Yes.
but no, while you were at Berkeley, you dealt with the transition, but then
Yeah.
you wrote a book. So like kind of,
Yes.
and this is while in dealing with COVID because that's also a different aspect that is
Yeah.
challenging in itself too. So
Mhm.
kind of walk me through that COVID into writing a book.
Yes. COVID hit my, like, talking about 2026, the class of
Yeah,
2026. COVID hit us in our sixth grade year. So
yeah,
for those who are familiar with their middle school journeys,
yeah,
sixth grade is a pivotal year because, you're not technically, for most schools, sixth grade is the start of middle school. At Buckley, the
yeah.
middle school starts in fifth grade.
Mm,
But, that's the age you're like in the 12, 11, 12, 13 range, going into 13
right.
range.
Yeah,
So that's the idea. You're really like developing your sense of self. You don't really consider yourself like in the tween category. You're more
right,
stepping towards teenager years. You're forming your own, identity, sense of self, your purpose, stepping into your own sense of who you are. And COVID came in the middle of that in our sixth grade year. And then we were remote for a long period. Um, Definitely, I felt like COVID was a very hard time for everyone. I think especially for those like myself who experienced loss during that time and grief
yeah,
from those who were who passed away from COVID. Definitely that added to the turmoil of the situation. But I think also the aspect of online learning definitely was new to adjust to. There's the idea of
right,
seeing your classmates on Zoom, glitches, having just all your interactions, your assessments on Zoom and everything. So I definitely felt like that was a hard time. But Buckley did a beautiful job of, maneuvering us to online learning and still having the resources that we needed. My sister and I, we would still have PE on Zoom. Because Gabby was in her first grade year when we went
right,
on online learning. So, I don't even think she herself like really had a bad time because Gabby seemed to be having, fun on
right,
Zoom with her
right,
friends because they would see movies on there and everything like that. Um, but definitely for me, I could definitely see how it was hard at that time,
mm,
because in sixth grade, you're more familiar with what's going on with the world around you versus someone who's in lower school.
yeah,
So that was a hard time for everybody. And then going into seventh grade, it was still very weird because we were wearing masks when we entered. On our desk, we would have these huge plastic shields, and they
right.
were very hard to see out of because most times they were cloudy, so you couldn't even see what was on the board in front of you. They were like covered your whole face.
That's
These
crazy.
plastic shields on your desk, they were like little clip-ins that you would clip into your desk, and you would actually carry your shield to every class. So every person would have a shield, and then when you get to your seat, you would clip your shield in. Um, so it was very awkward, with that. And then
Yeah,
also, at Buckley, we had gorgeous cafeteria that I was used to my whole life, the dining room, where at Buckley it's covered, a tradition is to do a senior plaque and all the walls would
Yeah.
be covered in their senior plaques. And we used to eat lunch outside. Sometimes it would be freezing. I used to have to wear mittens to eat
Yeah.
lunch, and we would still have to carry our plastic shields with us to lunch. So definitely it was very hard to connect in a sense during 7th grade, even though we were back in school. It wasn't really like the old days. We still had to carry our shields to everyone. There was still this idea of, catching up from what maybe students might have missed out on 6th grade when we were
Right.
online. And then in 8th grade, going into 8th grade, we were a little bit better, but there was still this idea of masks here. We didn't have the shields anymore. And it got better throughout the years. We would wear our masks sometimes, and then we would take them off if we were like giving a speech or giving a presentation. And I think Buckley really went away with masks around the time when I was going to graduate. Because when I went on my end of year senior trip to Europe, no one really wore a mask for that, maybe on the plane, but there wasn't really that aspect there. So it was very interesting. Even when I look back on all my middle school pictures, we have masks
Yeah.
on.
Mask on.
So,
Yeah.
and connecting to the writing aspect, definitely writing became a place of refuge for me during that time when I had suffered the loss of my uncle Alton, who was like a grandfather to me during COVID
Yeah.
because he passed from COVID. I definitely found poetry as a way of pouring into my grief and seeing how can I get these emotions I'm feeling out on the page. Um, and that passion really built throughout my years at Buckley, post coming back to school from COVID, where I would still use poetry as a way of, being a place to express feelings, to express certain emotions I'm going through. And in my 8th grade year, that was the year at the end, June 2022. That's when I
Right.
published my book, An Eclipse of Her Mind, which was an anthology of poetry I've written over my middle school years. So definitely when it connects to both my love for writing and COVID, I think that aspect of poetry was really honed in on during those COVID years when I was at home by my desk, feeling grief and not knowing exactly how to process it. But being able to use writing as a place of escape, a place of
Mhm.
refuge, and also looking back on it and being able to read my old poetry and see where I was at that time of my life. And in my 8th grade year, my teacher was very impressed with my writing. She was very impressed with my poetry. And that was why I was named Writer of the Year for 2022, Writer of the Year Award for 2022, because of my writing and because of my poetry and because the emotion you can feel off the page when one picks up a work written by me.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful, and it's like, I mean, it's very typical, but there's a reason why it's a typical saying, taking lemon and turning into lemonade. It's like you've
Mm,
taken that pain that, everyone's been touched in COVID different ways.
yeah.
Everyone's lost someone through, but taking that pain and translating
Mm-hmm.
it into poetry that people can read and,
Mm-hmm.
heal. Like, that's the point of
Yeah.
poetry. It's like almost therapy when you read
Mm-hmm.
certain poets writing,
Yeah.
because you can feel what they felt, and it almost helps you through dealing with that
Yeah.
grief or that pain. You see their perspective. You're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it like that, but hey,
Yeah.
now I'm seeing a new perspective. Maybe I can see the glass half full instead of
Yes.
half empty. I'm not the only one going through this, right?
Mm.
So there's just
And
so many. Yeah,
I think it's also interesting how my writing style has evolved since middle school, just to quickly
yeah,
add on, because in middle school I really focused on poetry and that was something I really loved and I still love poetry to this day. But I noticed that in at Spence, I really
yeah.
delved into storytelling and creative writing.
Mm,
And that was the whole, my whole work at Spence in terms of writing was through storytelling, was through creative writing. And in my junior year I took a class by my beloved teacher Miss Silva, which was my creative writing class, and that was something that really just involved all spheres of my love for the humanities, because not only are you using culture and using, what you know about certain individuals to create characters, but you're also using your lived experience to create storytelling, to create stories. One of the stories I wrote about, just to name a few,
Yeah.
one of my stories was called what was it called again? Oh, yes, I remember. The eye doesn't forget what the heart has seen. That was the title of one of my stories. And that was, we were asked to write a frame narrative, which is like a story within a story.
Yeah.
And I wrote a story about a romance story, actually, about this individual. And I grappled with themes of colorism, because it was placed in Louisiana. And I
Okay.
talked about like themes of colorism, where you have a dark skinned daughter and a lighter mom, and how you might feel challenged in those sense of things. I
Mm,
also talked about certain bonds, feeling accepted, feeling not accepted, and that was through one of my stories where my teacher really loved it, because not only was it a story of love and passion because it was a romance, it was also a story of certain themes in the Black community which still perpetrate to this day. Another story which I really loved, which I actually sent off to, in my college applications, was the prompt was write about a piece of clothing that your character wears. That was the
mm,
prompt. And I wrote about something that was very different. The clothing item I chose was shapewear or Spanx.
right,
And
right, right.
someone would think, how is she gonna write a story about shapewear or Spanx? Like waist
Right,
trainers? Like, what is she gonna write about with that?
right,
And how I formulated that story was to write about a character who struggles with body dysmorphia,
right.
and how she uses clothing items like Spanx, shapewear, waist trainers to kind of mask the illusion she sees in the mirror and to feel more comfortable in her body. And I
Right.
wrote that because, coming from an all girls school, we've talked about themes of body dysmorphia and how a lot of young girls, whether they see it in the media, they feel pressured to look a certain way or to be a certain way because of what they might see on social media or what they might see perpetrated in the media. And I wrote that story as a testament to young girls who might feel that they need to force themselves into certain items to make themselves look more beautiful. And my
Mm,
character, even though she originally wears this shapewear to mask what she feels insecure about, at the end of the story, she realizes that she's beautiful without it, and that she doesn't need to force herself into these contraptions to make herself look more beautiful or to make her more appeasable to the quote unquote, man's view. So that was
right,
something that was really pivotal and moved a lot of people in my class, because, it's a character who at first
right,
struggles with her body, struggles with what she looks like, struggles with what she sees in the mirror, and is disgusted by it and finds something to clothe it. But at the end of the story, she lets it go and she's free and she loves what she sees. So that is how my love for writing has progressed over the years, from writing poetry to writing stories that involve characters that everyone can kind of have a relation to and connect with.
Yeah, and it takes rigor too, because like poetry is a different problem to solve than long form writing, because it's
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to say as much as you can in as little words with poetry.
Yes.
Whereas with long form writing, you have a lot that you can say. I know you need to fill that space with things that is
Yes.
worth people to listen to or read, because you
Yes.
have their attention for such a long time. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more detail you have to give, a lot more plot points that you have to
Yes.
tie up,
Yes.
and so it's just like it's a different problem you have to solve with that. So having that range helps a lot, right? But let's talk about that transition from no, you're finished with Buckley, now you're at Spence. Like,
Yeah.
how did you decide to go to Spence? Let's start there. Like, how did you know Spence was a school for you?
Spence Spence is very special to me, and I find it very loving and very touching when I tell people that my first high school interview ever was Spence. Um
Yeah.
it's very like a full circle moment, cuz when I was applying to high school, we were still in this realm of um healing from COVID. So most
Hmm.
of the well, not most, majority of the interviews were on Zoom or on
Right.
like the school's like technological program or software.
Firm. Right.
Um and I was so nervous because I was like, "Oh my goodness, like Spence is a school that is like, it ties in my love for the arts, it ties in my passion for all my other subjects. It's in, a wonderful area of Manhattan because I really wanted to go to a city school. That was my love.
Gotcha.
Because I was not that interested in a boarding school campus. I was wanting to be in the city,
Right.
and I specifically in Manhattan. That is what my dream was. I always imagined like walking down and like seeing Central Park. Like that was my love. And that also with Spence, when talking to my head of school at the time, he really recommended Spence because he was like, I could definitely see you thriving there. So Spence was my first interview. Um, my interviewer, Miss Renee Chung, she was amazing. She was truly so comfortable. She made me feel so comfortable because I was so nervous at first. And we bonded over our shared Jamaican identity there. That was
Yeah.
something we bonded over. Also we also talked about things that books I loved, certain authors that I liked, like Jacqueline Woodson, which she also liked.
Right.
And just having that connection, and she truly made me feel comfortable and feel loved. And I'm not just saying that because I'm at Spence now and Spence is a huge part of my trajectory. In that moment, I really felt so welcomed by Miss Chung.
Hmm.
And when she passed a few years ago, I
Yeah.
felt very touched by that loss because she was one of the reasons why I chose Spence. And even when I came to Spence to visit, after all decisions had come out with high school and you went to go visit the schools that you were interested in and schools that you were interested in committing to, she immediately welcomed me at Spence. She made me feel so incredibly welcomed, and it felt like I was meeting somebody who was like a mother in the community.
Right.
And she definitely made me feel welcomed. And even at Spence, just walking into Spence for the first time, I immediately felt at home because when I entered my class, because at Spence, when you go for a new student or new like admissions visit, you get to sit in on a class if you're an accepted student. And I
Okay.
remember going into my class and they were immediately like, "Oh my God, welcome, Danielle." And I felt really a part of the conversation. They welcomed me into their circle because at Spence we sit in a circle, and they entered me into the circle, and everyone was just so lively and nice and welcome to meet another student. And I think also with the all girls school experience coming from years of co-ed education, Spence is truly the school environment where I feel like I have blossomed the most and felt the most love and support, coming from a place that wants to build women for a world that is currently male dominated and wants them to have all the tools in their success box to be able to go head to head with anybody and be able to come out victorious. So I think at Spence, their focus is building strong, caring worldview women who are able to, enter any space and be able to excel in. And at Spence, not only were we able to learn the tools to excel academically and to be good citizens and get into good colleges, we also learned the skills to be able to communicate with one another, to have friends for life, to be able to, cheer up a friend if she's crying, be able to be
Yeah.
sisters. And I think the sisterhood aspect of an all girls school really is what made my time at Spence so loved and so welcoming, and being able to try new things with my sisters
Yeah.
and not feel, embarrassed or in any way.
Yeah, no, I can tell that from my small stint at being around Spence individuals, both
Yes.
the students and the faculty, that there's a
Mm-hmm.
pride in what we're developing or what you guys are
Yes.
developing, and developing Renaissance women who can, like you said,
Yes.
feel comfortable in any room.
Yes.
And it's not just specific to arts, it's not specific to science,
Mm-hmm.
but any
Yes.
obstacle that comes in front of you, you can adapt and overcome. Your B Golden was what they were saying at
Yes,
at
yes, yes.
your graduation, and like I could see that you've developed that when you moved from Canberra Heights to Buckley, and then when from
Mm-hmm.
Buckley you went to Spence. But I feel like at Spence, like it's moving from surviving to thriving. Like you know your tools,
Yes.
you know you can execute. Like it like
Mm-hmm.
fueled the confidence that like I
Yes.
deserving to be in the room because I've done the
Yes.
work and I am the
Mm.
work, right? So yeah, I definitely I'm happy that, that
Mm-hmm.
was your choice of school. I could
Yes.
see, being on the outside, seeing baby Daniel to know, I can definitely see where that metamorphosis happened. And it was,
Mm.
we all saw the spark, but I feel like at Spence they just ignited it. Like we could see that you had a tenacity and a passion for people, that you could
Yes.
communicate well. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like at Spence it gave you the tools to really excel it to the next level. Um,
Yes.
and one of the things that I'm interested in knowing now is like you're at Spence.
Mm-hmm.
No, every transition, like we're going through transition moments. Now you're like
Yeah.
locked in on I need to get to college, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you're like, no, again, every transition has anxiety involved in it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Every transition has this like, am I worthy moment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you may have felt like that with Spence, but now you're at Spence, now you're going after like, I want to go after an Ivy League. I want to go to an Ivy
Yes.
League. Like, how do you choose your Ivy League? And for the persons who don't have the opportunity to go to Spence and they're like thinking of Ivy, like what tips
Mm-hmm.
could you give them on cultivating a strong profile for Ivies?
Yes, okay, perfect. So for me, how I chose my IV or chose the school that I was really interested in attending to for college, I think it has to do with the ethos and with the heart of the school. So when we look at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, where I'll be attending, the founder is Benjamin Franklin. And when we look at, this legacy of cultivation of innovation that he's left behind, and also the Quaker ideology that permeates throughout Penn's ethos, it really speaks to the heart of one's character. At Penn, we call ourselves Quakers. That's our mascot. It's like, go Quakers. And, that speaks to the Quaker ideology, if no, being a good neighbor, being a good neighbor for those around you, and being a good citizen. And at Penn, what really drew me to Penn was their commitment to community service and their want to give back. At Penn, they have the Civic House and Netter Center, which when I was applying was something I mentioned I would be very interested in being a part of, because they really give back to local neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and they do a lot of service work through the Netter Center and Civic House. And being an individual who, is very passionate in that throughout my community service work and also my equity work, being on equity council, being able to attend the student diversity leadership conference in Denver, Colorado, being able to go to the Dalton conference, which was in New York City, where I'm able to work with other independent schools in New York City to be able to see how can we make our schools more equitable, and also being a pivotal member in Spence's conference for civic engagement year and year again. Penn was definitely spoken to me on that civic and equity work and duty. And even with Penn being in Philadelphia, there is so much, grasp and out there. I was someone who I didn't really want a rural or suburban setting. With other
Yeah,
schools that I had looked at, whether it be in upstate New York,
yeah.
or, being more suburban areas in like Rhode Island or other places. Um Penn had really had that city aspect, which wasn't necessarily New York City because I wanted a change of states, but it still had that buzz and that life that I wanted to
Mm,
maintain. And I think also at Penn, which I really enjoyed, was, just the community. Even though it's an Ivy and, people always tend to say that, with certain Ivies, it's like stuck up, or, there's like this, like, everyone's just in it for themselves. At Penn, I truly felt that all the students wanted to kind of uplift each other, and that there's this aspect of, work hard, play hard, and also like be able to not only be good academic, individuals, but also be good persons. And I've met students at Penn. I have like people who went to Spence I connected with, and also new people who I've connected with. And it has been truly an amazing community at Penn that I've met so far. I haven't even stepped foot in my dorm yet. I don't even know what dorm I'm gonna
Right.
live in. And I've met so many amazing Quakers who are part of the UPenn community that just reaffirms my love for that. And I think one of the main things at Penn was for me was recognition.
Mhm.
And at Penn, they have this huge statue of this
Yeah.
Black woman, and it's right in the heart of the campus.
Mm.
And none of the schools I went to had a visual testament to a young Black woman like myself.
Okay.
And when writing one of my personal statements of like why Penn or why I was drawn to Penn, I talked about how when I went on my tour and I saw that beautiful statue of that Black woman in the heart of UPenn's campus, it spoke to me because it made me realize that here is someone who looks just like me, standing strong in the middle of an Ivy League campus. And it spoke to my heart because this is something that most you wouldn't really see on a campus, nonetheless,
Yeah.
a top 20 or anything like that. But to go to a school that I was interested in academically and seeing a visual testament of my culture, someone wearing, their braid, she has like Black features, everything. It really spoke to me and was something that I connected with at Penn. And even when I went there for my revisit day after my decisions got released, I took a picture next to that statue because it
Yeah, I
was
would I
something
would
that,
love to know who the person is in the future.
e-
So yeah,
yes,
we can
I
explore
I
that.
actually I wrote about that. Who created the statue. I don't remember the architect off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
someone definitely donated it, and I mentioned it in my write-in. But
Yeah.
now, if you do a quick Google search, statue of Black woman at UPenn, you will see it.
We'll see.
But yes, that was something that really stood out to me at Penn. The recognition, the community, and just like how involved they are and how I really love it. There, and I
Mhm.
think advice for individuals. People have this notion that one can only succeed if you go to an Ivy League. And even though I'm
Mhm.
somebody who will be attending one in the fall, I do not believe that because I feel that somebody who does not go to an Ivy League can still be very successful. And I think that if it matters with the drive. If you have the
Yeah.
drive and if you have the tenacity and if you have the want to do well, you will do well. Because you have people who will go to these institutions and just don't have the passion and they nothing really comes out of that education. But I
Yeah.
definitely feel like for someone who might feel discouraged, because you have thousands of amazing applicants who are more than worthy to attend one of these institutions and get denied admission.
Mhm.
So I definitely feel like, just because you don't gain acceptance to one of these places cuts down on who you are as an individual. I
Yeah.
believe that anyone can go to any institution and do well for themselves as long as they have that drive and that inner passion. Um, and there are so many top universities that aren't considered Ivy League, but people would want to go to, like MIT, Stanford,
Right.
Northwestern,
Right.
University of Michigan, and the list goes on. So I definitely feel like any top 20, any top 30 is an accomplishment, and anyone should be proud of themselves. And for those who may not have the chance to attend one of those top 20 or top 30s, as long as you stay, driven in your passions, you will succeed. And for those students who want to attend an Ivy League and are looking at the quote unquote, what can you do? Like, what boxes can you check off? The
Right. Right.
admissions process is very broad. It's very abstract. You can have plus 1500 SAT, plus 33 ACT, 4.0 GPA, and be denied admission. I think for me, what really stood out in my narrative to Penn and other schools that I was granted admissions to was my citizenship and my worldview of the world.
Mm,
Coming, my story played a huge part. At Spence, I was involved in an independent history research project. And through that, I researched the aftermath of apartheid in South Africa and the socioeconomic and psychological aspect of apartheid. And
mm,
the ethos of my project was decolonizing the mind. What does it look like to decolonize the mind after years of racial stratification?
right.
And for me, I even took that idea of decolonizing the mind and embedded it into my personal statement. So my personal statement for college talked about, how one's mind can be colonized, coming from a Jamaican family, years of, the British being in Jamaica. How can one be
Yeah.
colonized by those aspects? How can one
Mm,
learn the themes of colonization, mental colonization, what has been passed down through years, aspects of, colorism, aspects of
colorism.
hair,
Big.
how
Yep.
can someone feel that they are not beautiful with what they see in the mirror because of what has been perpetrated through their families and through their
Mm,
cultures? And I talked about how I decolonized my own idea of myself through my research and through my
yeah.
writing, and how I've been able to decolonize my mind as a young Black woman.
Yeah.
And that was something that I felt was very impactful to some of these schools that I shared this personal narrative with, which was really inspired by this great book by Ngugi Thiong'o called Decolonizing the Mind.
Mm,
And I really talked about that aspect. So I think when looking at, what might draw Ivy League admissions officers to a candidate, I think it has to do with the originality of a student. It has to do with the heart, the passion, the love for learning, and also what sets you apart from the rest. For me, my extracurriculars, whether it be found in a 501c3 international nonprofit, given back to areas in Jamaica which have been devastated either by Hurricane Melissa or lack of
right.
education for girls in underserved areas, or even being involved in certain aspects of my work outside of Spence, where being the co-vice president and public relations director for Empowering Girls of Color, seeing how my service work does not only revolve around the red doors, but it stretches outside the red doors of Spence and permeates through my whole being, and how it connects to those humble beginnings of being a daughter of Jamaican immigrants. So I definitely feel like my connection and what really spoke to these stories, which really spoke to these stories that these admissions officers read about me, was they could see throughout every piece of writing I put together, throughout my extracurriculars writ list, throughout my recommendations, that I was a young woman who was really grounded in her sense of purpose, grounded in her academic, vigor, but also having access to think about certain aspects of my individuality that I've struggled with and that I'm coming to terms with.
Yeah, I think beautifully said. And one of the tools that people miss out on writing, like when I speak to individuals, they're like, yeah, you go through the classes, you're going through the classes, but it's not just going through the classes, but
Yeah.
it's a tool that you're going to use in the future, right?
Yeah.
Um, Many times in engineering school, I still use those tools to solve problems in work, and I'm not working as an engineer, right? And
Yes.
writing is a tool, and it helps you
Mhm.
clarify your thought, and it's a way of introspecting and like tinkering and figuring out like what is it that you're trying to say? What is it that I'm feeling that I want to express very clearly and concise, right? And so I feel that you've learned this really sharp tool through your writing experience on how to
Mhm.
like take a thought, take a
Yeah.
problem and like express it in its full
Yeah.
terms and conditions of what you're trying to say. Last question to you before we wrap
Mhm.
it up is what would you say to your younger self, or a younger version of you, or a younger version of someone else, your age group, or just a little younger than you? What would you say? What would be the words you would say to them before you get going?
Interesting, because I was grabbing reaching for something. At
Yeah.
Spence, in our ninth grade year, before we started our like introduction into freshman year, we wrote
Yeah.
a letter to ourselves.
Did you
And
really? Oh,
yes,
that's
I
great.
did. And this was a letter I wrote when I was 13.
Okay.
No, not 13. I was 12 because I turned 13 in November of my freshman year. And I am now 17, about to be 18 in November. And it's a very short letter, but I'm going to read it really quickly for you
Yes,
all
please.
and then highlight what I would say again to my younger self. So, this was written August 17th, 2022. Dear future Danielle, I am incredibly proud of how far you have come. Today is my third and last day at Spend Start. By the way, Spend Start was an introductory program for new ninth graders.
Gotcha.
Everyone around me is incredibly kind and welcoming. At first, I was a little nervous about coming into a such high achieving community and venturing to the city every day, but after talking to mom and dad and restoring my confidence in myself, I know that I will soar at Spence. I am so exceptionally grateful for mom, dad, for pushing me to believe in myself and making the decision to enroll me in Spence. They are really incredible people with such a strong sense of faith. Just yesterday, it felt like Gabby and I started at Buckley for the first time. I will truly miss seeing her beautiful face on the way to school in the morning and when I pick her up from study hall in the afternoons. I'll also miss my movie dates with Raman when we go to see Big Hero 6 or The Big Dinosaur. I want you to remember, Danielle, to stay confident yet humble, gracious yet assertive at times, kind and beautiful on the outside and the inside. Always be you. Always stay you, and never let anyone influence that. Embrace your individuality and your uniqueness, Danielle, because you are special and destined for greatness. I'm excited to see where Spence takes us in life. The sky is our limit. As the great Nelson Mandela once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Keep your chin up, Danny. Best Danielle, age 12, age 13, Wednesday, August 17th.
That's
So,
amazing. And
yes, this
you had
was the
no
letter.
idea I was going to ask you that
No,
question. You
I
had
had no idea.
no
I
idea.
have my box here on my desk, my Danielle
Right.
box, Danielle, and I had the letter in this, and as soon as you asked me this, I was like, oh my God, I have to share it with you. By the
Yeah.
way, this was in ninth grade, so I was not 12. I was 13, turning 14. My
So,
mistake from
yeah.
early on. But yes, I was 13 when I wrote this letter, and I'm 17 now. And I think little Danielle really
Yeah.
touched on what I would have wanted to say to my younger self, which would
Yeah.
be to continue to inspire yourself, to continue to, love yourself, even though the path may seem hard. And this goes for everything, whether going through that admission cycle, things have changed a lot with the,
That's changed. Yeah.
lots have changed during the admission cycles. There used to be affirmative action that has been abolished. Things like that have really changed admissions landscapes for students all over the world. So, going through a hectic college admissions cycle and wanting to do well, and also just navigating the rigorous intensity of Spence throughout the years, there can be times when you can feel tired, you can feel burnt out, you can feel exhausted. And I would just tell her, it's okay to feel those feelings because we're not superhumans. There are going to be times when we feel tired and we need a relaxed day. So I would tell her, little Danielle, to know that you will come out victorious. And this quote, I even mentioned it in my research paper. It always seems impossible until it's done, by Nelson Mandela. I would tell her to keep replaying that in her head because there's so many times, at my journey, whether it be at Spence, whether it be at Buckley, whether it be in Cambria, why I felt discouraged if things would actually come through. I felt discouraged if things would actually happen. And when you're entering, speaking to my current, most recent experience, and you're going through that admission cycle with students all over the world, such amazing students coming from such amazing, backgrounds who are applying to these colleges, it's easy to feel like, wow, will I really turn out successful? Will I really get the results that I've been wanting for? So I would tell her to never doubt yourself because, you will come through victorious with those people who love you and support you and will always be through your side. It takes a village, it takes a family, it takes your faith in whether it takes your faith to take you there, and faith in self and faith in, you know, your family and what you bring to the table. So I would definitely tell her to maintain her faith, to maintain her village, to maintain her love, and to never feel discouraged by the adversities that come in your way, because you will always come out victorious because you are destined for greatness.
Amazing. Before we get going, I want to let you know that everyone that's seeing your growth is completely and utterly proud of you. 100%.
Thank you.
Not to mention baby Danielle that wrote that letter is super proud of Danielle now, because you did the full circle. You spoke about Nelson Mandela coming into Spence, and your
Yes.
final paper was on apartheid that he helped usher away
Yes.
from, right? So it's
Yes.
like you made like, if that little Danielle had a check mark box of
Yes.
things, like you went through it, and and I think that's amazing that Spence had you write that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like you can always, it's almost like a journal entry. It's such a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to do.
Yeah. The
It's
Spence
that's so
School.
great. That's so
Yes.
amazing. And this is also a journal entry, because
Yes.
I'm telling you, you're going to finish college and you're going to be doing multiple podcasts. And
Mm.
you can always go back to this one, your first podcast that you did,
Mm-hmm.
and see what you said about yourself now and what your trajectory in the future is going to be. So, looking
Yes.
forward to it. Keep being golden.
Yes, and thank you for having me on Dream Plan Execute. This was really an amazing opportunity to be on my first podcast, and also be on my first podcast with my big brother, and for him to build this amazing platform. And dream it. You have to dream it. And in order to dream, once you have your dream, you can plan out what you want to see, what you want to accomplish, and then the final plan is just to execute it.
Execute.
Execute your visions. And I think we've executed a nice podcast here this
Yes, we
evening.
did. Yes, we did. It was good. Thank you so much for taking the
Of
time,
course.
Danielle. Appreciate you. We love you. Keep safe. And again, and you know this, anything you need, you can always reach out to me. All right.
Of course. Love you
I'm
too. Thanks
always here
again,
for you.
Rom.
Thanks. Bye.